What's going on, AP Government people? This is my very first video for AP Government. We will have lots of videos in time for your exam in May. We're going to start off with the textbook Government in America. I'm using the 15th edition, but if you're using another edition, chances are it will match up very well to the book edition that you have. We're going to start off with Chapter 1, Introducing Government in America. If you have any comments or questions for me, you can always leave them in the comment section below or follow me on Twitter at AdamNorrisAP, and I would like to give a shout out to Julia Favazzo for watching and her support during AP US history as well. So let's get started with Chapter 1. All right, politics and government matter. We're going to figure out why this is the case. So some big ideas to think about are that many Americans under 30 don't vote or follow politics, and this is absolutely true. You see this huge discrepancy between younger voters and older voters over the ages of 65. Many Americans over 65 do vote because there are several important issues to them, including Social Security. But many individuals under 30 do not exercise their right to vote. So why is there this discrepancy? Well, there's a lot of apathy for young voters, and apathy pretty much means you don't care, you're not interested. Senior citizens are also interested in issues that affect them. I mentioned Social Security. You also have Medicare. Although there are more news outlets today, you think about cable news, you have CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. News itself can be avoided more than in the past. There are so many channels out there that you can watch without ever getting news, and plus you can go on the internet, you can use Facebook, Twitter, and not really have to worry about getting news if you don't want to. Cable TV, that's a big thing I like to watch. I'm a huge baseball fan. Sports, computers, phones, etc. All these things you can use, and really if you don't want to, you don't have to see a lot of news stories. When President Nixon would give his addresses on TV, he averaged a rating of about 50. Obama today averages a rating of about 24. So you see that the ratings are less than half of what they were for the current president for when Nixon was giving his addresses. Let's talk about government. What exactly is it? It is, according to the textbook, the institutions that make decisions for a society collectively. And the federal government is made up of three really big parts and then another fourth important part, and that is Congress, the president, the courts, which is led by the Supreme Court, and then agencies or the bureaucracy. And we'll talk about each one of these a lot more in depth in the coming chapters. So what do all governments have in common? Well, they provide for a national defense, and the U.S. spends about $650 billion a year on national defense. Governments also provide public services, whether it's roads, libraries, schools, etc., and they help preserve order. And the United States can do this by using the National Guard in cases of rioting, which they have in the past as well. They also socialize the young, and they do this by providing an education. And that's something that's been really important in American history, is providing an education, because these Americans will grow up and vote when they are older. And they also collect taxes, which are used to pay for public goods and services. So those are the five things that really all governments have in common. So let's talk about politics now. What exactly is politics? Well, according to page 9, politics determines whom we select as our government leaders and what policies these leaders pursue. So the media tends to focus on the who of politics. That's your voters, your candidates, the parties, whether it's Democrats, Republicans, independent, third parties, you name it. The what of politics is focusing on the benefits that individuals receive, the taxes, what types of taxes are we talking about, and other things like that. The how of politics is the ways of participation. So how can American citizens participate? They can do more than just vote. That's usually the first thing people think of when we talk about participating in politics. There's also lobbying and other things as well. And single issue groups, when you hear this term, this refers to supporters who vote for a candidate usually on the basis of one issue. And a very popular single issue is abortion. Some people will vote for a candidate to political office solely on that candidate's stance on abortion, whether they are pro-life or pro-choice. All right, let's talk about the policy-making system. So how do people get involved in a democracy? Well, again, I mentioned earlier, you can vote. You can get involved in political parties, both on your local level and the national level, and you can participate in interest groups as well. When we're talking about linkage institutions, these are groups that let policymakers and government know the preference of Americans, so they kind of have the feel of the pulse of the American public. And these institutions include two major things, basically political parties and the media. The media is a great example of a linkage institution. Policy agenda are issues that attract the serious attention of public officials and other people actively involved in politics at a given time. We'll spend a lot of time later in this book talking about policy agenda. And Americans tend to vote for candidates that support their major concerns. And that really makes sense. You're going to vote for somebody who kind of represents and shares similar ideas that you do. And bad news can absolutely affect policy agenda. And many times bad news affects it more negatively than good news affects it positively. So bad news is never good for policy agenda if you're okay with the status quo. Policy-making institutions, this is, again, as I mentioned, Congress, the president, courts, and some would argue a fourth part, the bureaucracy, which is made up of government agencies as well. And this bureaucracy, these government agencies have grown quite significantly in years. And most policies involve multiple institutions' involvement. It's really not just one area. You'll see a lot of them come together in helping develop and influence policies. All right, democracy. What the heck is democracy? It is a system of selecting policymakers and of organizing government so that policy reflects citizens' preference. Originally, the framers feared giving people many democratic elements we have and know today. So here at the Constitutional Convention, when they created the Constitution, there are many elements of democracy that we think of today that were not in the original Constitution, including the ability to vote for your own senators. That was not something that American citizens could do. It was up to the state legislatures. Another thing is the idea of the Electoral College, which we'll talk about later. That is there to kind of limit the popular will. So democracy in America under the Constitution has expanded since it was originally created. So let's talk about 5 criteria of an ideal democratic process. You have equality in voting, the idea that that all individuals can vote. You have effective participation, so citizens are involved in the government. Not really true at all today. We have a very low participation rate. You have enlightened understanding, and this really plays a key role in the First Amendment, free press and free speech, where you can share your opinions with others, even if they are different than the mainstream opinions. Citizen control of the agenda. One group should not control policy. You should really have most of society having the ability to control the agenda. And you also have inclusion. Again, nobody is left out from this. Restraints protecting the minority from the majority. This is an important topic. Again, we'll talk about in coming chapters, that it's important to protect the ideas of the minority, a small portion of the population. And one major way that their rights are protected is from the First Amendment, this idea of free speech. So if you disagree with a major policy, you can freely express your ideas. And in a representative government, which is what we have, we do not have a direct democracy. We really have a representative government where we elect officials to vote on our behalf. Those officials should reflect the will of the citizens. And if they don't, then the citizens have a chance to vote them out of office the next time they are up for re-election. All right, 3 theories of American democracy. Again, I keep saying we'll get into these later, but the first chapter really just kind of lays out all these ideas, but we will spend some time talking about these in future videos. 1, pluralism. This is the idea that interest groups can influence public policy. You have like the National Rifle Association, the NRA, the National Organization of Women, and the United Auto Workers. These are 3 major interest groups that really can help influence public policy and legislation. They have a lot of backing and a lot of power. And these groups can heavily influence policy. Saw this during the civil rights in the 1950s and the 1960s. And they're able to do it through various government avenues, especially the courts. And critics of pluralism, of this idea of these interest groups influencing public policy, argue that these groups, for instance the NRA, may have too much power, and they say that that's not good for democracy. So critics of pluralism don't like this. Advocates of pluralism, or those that are in favor of it, would tell you that these are policies that need to be made, and this is one avenue of achieving that. Let's talk about elitism. This is another theory of American democracy. This is the belief that the upper class has too much power. And the argument is that a few people are the decision makers in government, that it's it's not really a representation of the will of the majority, but rather a few individuals. Hyperpluralism is the belief that the government is weaker due to many groups. So let's go back to the NRA, the NOW, and the UAW. If you believe in hyperpluralism, you would say that that's actually kind of a bad thing to have all those interest groups, because there's too many interest groups competing and the government is weaker. And too many of these groups would lead to nothing getting done. And also we'll see that this overlapping powers by government makes it hard to implement policy. And this is something we'll talk about when we get to the chapter on federalism. Okay, we'll continue with challenges to democracy. We have increased complexity of issues, and this is something that, the more time that passes, the more complex issues are. We're dealing with issues today that our founding fathers could never have envisioned, and so many of these complex issues leads to elite experts, and really only a few people have a really good understanding of what these issues are. We also have limited participation in government, which we talked about in the beginning of the video. So we have a low voter turnout rate by youths, which can lead to challenges in the future. Escalating campaign costs. This is a huge part of this course. Campaigns. We'll talk about political action committees, and these help fund campaigns and are very influential. And we have diverse political interests. Many individuals in this country have different political ideas, and this can lead to policy gridlock in which nothing gets done because there's kind of so much happening and so many different ideas. With American political culture and democracy, there are 5 elements. 1, liberty. And immigrants, when they're asked why are they coming to America, most of them will say this idea of freedom, especially this idea of freedom of speech and religion. Egalitarianism is the idea that there's equal opportunity in America due to a lack of a monarchy or an aristocracy. And equality is not and cannot be guaranteed, so everybody can have a chance to be successful. So egalitarianism, this idea of equal opportunity for something, doesn't necessarily mean that everybody will be equal. Individualism, America has a very unique identity, in large part due to the frontier. And if you took AP US history, or you will take it, you will be introduced and familiar with this guy, Frederick Jackson Turner. He wrote this thesis that the American identity was based on the frontier. Laissez-faire is a very influential term and idea that is still around. It has been around for hundreds of years, and Adam Smith really kind of pioneered this. And this is the preference for limited government and free markets. Free markets meaning that there can be trade with little restrictions, such as tariffs. And Americans pay less taxes than other democracies, especially those in Europe. If you are a populist, you would advocate the rights of average citizens, and you would be against the privileged elites. And a very famous populist in history is William Jennings Bryan, who ran for election 3 separate times and lost all 3 of them. Do you know anybody else who ran for president 3 times and lost? That would be my boy Henry Clay. So I'm going to see how much I can incorporate Henry Clay into AP government. If you're a Henry Clay fan, enjoy the ride. If you're not, you better get used to it, because I'm going to keep talking about him. All right, the scope of government in America. Governments spend about 1/3 of the gross domestic product, or the GDP. 24 million Americans are government employees. That's quite a large number. And Social Security consumes 1/5 of the national budget, and it's only going to increase in the coming years with baby boomers. These are individuals that were born after World War II up to 1964, and it is an enormous group of individuals, and many of them are retiring and are eligible to receive Social Security and will be taking money from Social Security. And since 1969, 1970s forward, except for a few Clinton surpluses, the government has run deficits, meaning they spend more than they bring in, and that has led to several issues as well. All right, thank you guys very much for watching. That was Chapter 1. If you have not already, please take a moment and subscribe to my channel. Help me spread the word. If you found this video helpful, please let somebody else know that would find it helpful. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section below, or follow me on Twitter at AdamNorrisAP. Thank you guys very much for watching, and have a good day.